Good morning, Ugly Mug marketing friends and followers. Welcome to another edition of Ugly Mug Marketing Coffee Chats, the live show where we drink coffee and talk all about marketing, leadership, business, and everything in between. My name is Hannah Valia, and I am the Director of Communications and Teaching here at Ugly Mug. And today I am joined by a very special guest. Y'all know we usually have Ugly Mug Marketing people on here every single week, but today we have a branding strategist expert and my new friend, Mike Brevik. Mike calls himself the Chief Barketing Officer at Cyberdogz Marketing. He is a wealth of knowledge when it comes to branding and marketing, and I am so excited for him to dive into all the things and for you to get to learn directly from him today. I recently had the pleasure of being on his podcast, Brand Retro, but now it's Mike's turn to sit in the hot seat. So welcome to Coffee Chats, Mike.
Hey, Hannah, thank you. Thanks for having me on. I appreciate it.
Yeah, excited to dive into all the things today. There are some folks that are probably going to be tuning in today or catching the replay later who haven't had the opportunity to meet you or who have never listened to the Brand Retro podcast. And so for those who are listening and haven't had that opportunity yet, tell us a little bit about where you're from, where your company is located, how you got started in marketing, and what you like to do for fun.
Yeah, so I am from a small town in Minnesota, Twin Valley, Minnesota. And
Love it.
yeah, so I've been kind of in and around, bouncing around the marketing industry for a long time. And I decided to start Cyberdogz in 2015. And we are headquartered out of Hawley, Minnesota, which is not too far from Fargo, North Dakota.
Love it.
And yeah, and I'm Minnesota born and raised, so I like to hunt and fish and kind of do all the Minnesota things. But I also, when I started Cyberdogz, I wanted to be able to create something that, kind of allowed me to kind of stay in the Midwest, but kind of work all over the place and kind of have clients and team members and kind of have more of a national approach to how we wanted to build things. So that's essentially what we did. And we have clients and team members all over the country and even outside of the country. So it's pretty cool to be able to make that happen and to be able to still, kind of be in my backyard, small town Minnesota. So
Yeah, that's amazing. That's really, I remember when we were talking and having like this conversation on your podcast, there were just so many like parallels between Ugly Mug Marketing and Cyberdogz. And I feel like that same sentiment of like wanting to still be in that small town and in your own backyard while having clients all across the country is really the same mentality of our owner and founder, Wayne. When he started Ugly Mug, like that was really important to him to stay headquartered in central Louisiana. And sometimes people are like, what? Alexandria? Like, is that by New Orleans or is that in Baton Rouge? And we're like,
right.
no, like middle of the state, same small town feel, but serving clients in the same way all across the country. And team members like me who are in Raleigh, we've got a team member in Baton Rouge, got another team member in Michigan. So yeah, people and folks all over. So I love that there's that same similarity between Ugly Mug and Cyberdogz. So thanks for sharing a little bit more about you and kind of how you got started in this crazy industry of marketing and branding. So today's conversation is really all about branding. And this is something that we don't necessarily focus on a ton at Ugly Mug. And so I wanted to have you on because that seems to be your bread and butter. And a lot of times when people talk to us about branding, they really focus on their logo because we do logo work. But they seem to think that that is like it when it comes to like your brand. They're like, yes, it's the logo. We have this beautiful color palette. We have this really modern, edgy logo that tells people who we are and what we're about. But then they think that's it, right? And branding is so much more than that. And it's an essential part of marketing. So, how do you define branding outside of just the logo?
Yeah, and great question, but also like just to add on what you were saying is like I run into the same thing constantly where and I just don't think the clients necessarily know better. So they think that,
Yeah.
when it comes to logo and some of those elements of a brand, they kind of think, well, I'm checking the box, so that's branding, right? That's pretty much covering it. And
Yeah.
and no, I have to sit down with them and kind of explain to them that, I mean, it's an element of, and yes, it's a step in the process, and it's part of that journey, but the brand overall is really, it's the collection of all those pieces. It's the, how those dots connect across your brand and across your marketing initiatives, and essentially working your way to that journey should lead you to a place where you have a feeling and a semi perception
Mm,
about what that brand is all about. Now, most people don't realize it, but we're inundated with brand every day, and it's very subliminal. Like sometimes it's more obvious. It might be a commercial, it could be a Super Bowl commercial, it could be all these different things, but when you walk into a retail store like an Apple store, there's a smell and there's a feel and there's just
yes.
elements there that you can't really define what they are. They're very subliminal, but those are all recipe, ingredients in this recipe of brand that it just kind of finds its way in our heads. We that's how we trigger like these deja vu moments, and it's just part of that feeling and the overall makeup of. Now, back to your point, like, yeah, logo is definitely part of it, and a logo can carry the weight of the brand, and it could be kind of your lead horse in that whole
Yeah.
process, so to speak. But everything from the way you talk as a brand to the way you're,
Mm,
the elements and the assets that you use to put your brand out there, from marketing collateral to business cards to letterhead to swag to, like, all
yeah.
those things can work together in this process. But um you really have to have a clear vision for what kind of what you want your brand to invoke and represent, and then work towards that, and try to give that feeling to people, because once you get inside their heads and once you've kind of subliminally found your way into their psyche, they're going to remember you as that brand, and what and the feeling that you gave them, when you delivered that product or that experience or whatever that was.
Yeah. Isn't there like an old adage that it's not about what you did or what you said, it's about how you made somebody feel? Like that's what they're actually going to remember about you. And I think that that's so true. And everything that you're saying is, yeah, we're trying to evoke emotion in
Yeah.
people. And and that is what people cling to for the memories or for the wanting to go back there. I felt happy, or I felt seen, or I felt understood, or, like whatever that like desire, that like psychological desires that people have. Like if your brand can fulfill that in some way, shape, or form, that is how people are really going to remember you. And that is about so much more than the logo. That could even be down to the experience that they have when they step into your brick and mortar store, or when they go to your website. Like you were saying, talking about the Apple store. And on a previous coffee chat, we were talking about them as far as setting trends for websites. But
Yep.
when you go to the Apple website and then you go to the Apple store, you feel the same way. Like
Yep.
those things, they have the same look and they evoke the same emotions. Like that's so fascinating to me. Like how do we ensure that we're doing that? Like are there other components or things that we need to have in place in order to can like make somebody feel that way about our brand?
Yeah, I mean, I think the recipe is essentially different for everybody and every brand and every company, but
Mhm.
I think the part that everybody has to inject into their process is intention and consistency. So, like, you have to
Mm.
intentionally not miss those opportunities to put your brand out there and to kind of capture every detail of the experience. So, like, I, this is going to be an exact quote, but I think it was Jeff Bezos has a quote out there about
Mhm.
basically your brand is what people say about you when you're not in the room. And
Mm.
it's
Yeah.
very true in that, like, don't miss those opportunities. And it's, some companies do a really great job with swag versus radio ads versus whatever, and that's not necessarily the exact recipe everybody has to follow. But when you look at your ideal client and where you are as a brand, how can you take every one of those touch points and not necessarily control it, but influence it and intentionally put your brand in the position to kind of be represented successfully in those scenarios. And it's an evolution, it's an over time thing, but as business owners, if you can kind of see it that way and continue to kind of layer that up over the course of time, you'll
Yeah.
eventually find yourself with a very strong and well represented brand. And then once that foundation is built, then you can refine, you can calibrate, you can continue to tweak it to get kind of the message out there the way you want it. But when you kind of start off with this logo and you just check the box, you think, well, I think I'm good. I think I'm done now. You've just completely went on the wrong page and you missed all the opportunities. So that
Yeah.
intentionality really needs to live on and just never stop kind of being intentional and finding ways to represent it. Like I even just to go on the Apple thing, if you've ever bought an Apple product and you've opened that, that iPhone or, the earbuds or whatever it is, that just the box itself is an experience.
Yes.
Like
The
there's a
packaging.
quality, yeah, there's a quality and a tightness and it's just so spot on that yes,
Yeah.
it directly connects to and is related to that Apple Store experience, but
Yeah.
it's so good that you kind of measure everybody else against that. Like there are
Yeah.
very few companies that represent a packaging strategy like that. And,
Yeah.
is that something that we talk about normal as people? Not really, but if you've been through it, you know exactly what I'm talking about.
Yes. Like the absolutely satisfying feeling that you get when you're peeling off the packaging like screen protector layer or the outside of the AirPod film too that they
Yep,
put on your on AirPods. Like, yeah, like those are all like that is even a feeling that is associated with their brand now. Like
right.
unboxing videos. Like literally, what world do we live in where we watch YouTube videos of people unboxing
Yeah,
packages from brands and companies of different products? But everybody who has an iPhone knows that feeling, like you said, of when you're opening up that packaging and you're peeling it off. It
yep.
feels good. It feels oddly satisfying.
And it's really about, again, it's about not missing an opportunity. Like even if you order things from certain online retailers, you'll see different packaging and different things that show up in that package. It could be the box it's in, it could be the poly bag it's wrapped in, it could be the tissue paper that's inside the box. Like these are
Yes.
all very could be considered very trivial things. They could be disregarded easily. But if
Yeah.
you don't disregard them, and again, keep budgets in mind and do what's good for you, but
Yeah.
as you can, as you find it affordable, like those little things add up to an experience. And
Yes.
kind of taking the long way around to your question, that's what
Yeah.
that's how I just define like what a brand is. It's really about the experience, 100%.
Yeah. And so, in order to create a great experience, I want to come back to something you mentioned just a few moments ago is knowing or understanding who you're serving and having that ideal customer. Like in the evolution or in the creation of a brand, how important is that? And where does that fall in place when we're thinking about strategy and designing a logo? Like, when do we need to consider that?
I think you need to consider it right at the beginning, but I think first and foremost, you need to be honest about it. And
Mm,
that's to me where kind of most people start off on the wrong foot because what happens is we just, we read a blog or we find something online and we think our ideal audience looks like X, Y, and Z. And where
yeah.
is that coming from? Is it coming from a place of data, of research, of background, of or are you just thinking, well, I'm X, Y, and Z business, and I really want to go after people that have money. So I'm going to go after with people with certain, titles in their name. And that's how
Mm,
most people get there. And I'm not even saying that's 100% wrong. It could be just a starting point. But as
yeah.
you gain knowledge about your brand and as you get more kind of in the weeds of who these people are, it's really about meeting them where they're at and being relatable, and that's the big thing with the brand is you want to be relatable. One of the things, just a quick story, like when I first started my brand, I had a client kind of call me out on it and say, hey, I have a question about your logo and your brand overall. And I'm like, sure, what is it? And he's like, well, do you think your brand really caters to females? And I said,
Mm.
well, yeah, okay, fair question. But I'm kind of
Yeah.
like, well, not necessarily, but I also didn't set out to cater towards male or females. Like I built a brand based off of just people and generality, and honestly, if you actually look at like the English bulldog, which is the inspiration for the Cyberdogz logo,
Yeah.
it's damn hard to tell the difference between a male and a female. So
Yeah.
I didn't even imply gender, so to speak. So I don't know that matters in this case. And
Mm.
I just thought the question was fascinating because he kind of challenged me to think beyond the surface of what even my own brand was, and in a way to kind of back me in a corner to defend it. But at the same time, I'm
Yeah.
like, good question, but I think everybody needs to look beyond, kind of where they're trying to get to sometimes, and where am I at, and what's the path of least resistance for me to be relatable and for me to, find my right customer. Because I think
Yeah.
in business, a lot of times we're very much a monkey see, monkey do type culture where I just look at my competitors and I think, if those are the right clients for them, they must be the right clients for me because they're my competitor. And, if I'm doing what they're
Mm.
doing, then we must be looking at the same people. And again, not saying that couldn't be a starting point or a reference point in this discussion, but not necessarily. Like maybe
Yeah.
there's people, maybe your competitor is neglecting a whole subset of people that nobody's paying attention to, and now they don't have a solution. Maybe those are your people. Maybe that's your opportunity. So
Yeah.
I think kind of going deeper on your brand, I think, who is my audience? What's ideal? I think it varies. Again, I think there's
Yeah.
point of references and there's different places you can look to kind of find, kind of comps, so to speak, as to what to look at. But
Yeah.
it really does start with you and who you are as a brand.
Yeah. And then it sounds like it just kind of evolves. Like it's not when you get started, like you said, that's your reference point and your starting point. That's
Yeah.
not necessarily the end all be all of who you're going to be going after or the audience that you're going to have the most success with. That's really fascinating. And it's almost like casting a wide net initially and
Yeah.
then studying the data of who you're actually attracting and saying, oh, well, if I'm an e-commerce brand and selling a product, like, are there certain pockets or of, geographically that, I'm having a lot more success in? Or who are the people that are actually placing these orders? Like, who do I actually need to be catering my content towards? Who is the brand actually like resonating with, even if they're buying the product for someone else, which I think
Yeah.
is like really fascinating. I've been getting a lot of ads for this, not to go off on this tangent, but I've been getting a lot of ads for this polo, like they make golf shirt company.
Yep.
But I'm like, I am interested in golf. Like my husband and I occasionally will golf. Like, we're mostly there to socialize and, have a beer or two on the course, but we're not big golfers. So I'm like, why am I getting served this? But what I've noticed about their ads is that it is a wife talking about why she bought this shirt for her husband and why it's such a great product. And I just think that's such an interesting positioning for their brand overall because the product itself is for men. Like it's a men's polo shirt company. But the
Right.
way that they're marketing is to a wife or to a girlfriend. And they're using her to get in front of and say, this is why it's so great. Because everybody knows I'm probably doing the majority of the shopping for my husband. In our case, it might not be everybody's case, but I'm like, oh, hey, this is nice. I think you should get this. Like, this would be great for vacation or for this trip or, for you to wear to work. And so I just think that's like really interesting too, when you're thinking about your brand and who the messaging is actually resonating for and who it's actually the message is intended for. It might not necessarily be for the end user all the time too. It might be for someone else who has buying power, decision making power too.
Yeah, and I think it's important in that process to even figure out who's not your client. Like,
Yes.
what does my not
Mm.
client look like? Like, I don't wanna work with X, Y, and Z kind of people, and if I find with what I'm doing, if I find those kinds of people are coming to me more often or too often, maybe I need to make an adjustment because 'cause I'm attracting the wrong kind of people. So, like, to
Yeah.
your point, kinda dialing in what you're looking for and catering to that is important, but also look at what you're not looking for and factor that in. And I go as far as even with my own brand, I do a lot of brand association stuff and different things to kinda let people in on a little bit of insight as to who I am because I'm from Minnesota. Like, I'm not East Coast, I'm not West Coast. I mean, we have different influences that we like to take credit for, but, you know, I want people to know that, I'm pretty blue collar at its core. I'm pretty blue collar. I like Pabst Blue Ribbon. I'm pretty
Yeah.
I'm pretty relatable in that way. I like to
Yeah.
build that into my brand as well so that people kinda get a peek at who they're dealing with. I think
Yeah.
as companies, like you mentioned the golf, kind of industry, I think as companies, it's like, well, who's your ideal client? Well, I'm targeting golfers. Well, that is ridiculously wide. So what kind of
Yes.
golfer are you looking for? Are you looking for the
And
weekend
so
warrior?
competitive.
Yeah, or like what kind of golfer? Because there's segments. There's PGA golfers, there's semi-pros, there's guys that are weekend warriors, there's guys that only do it at bachelor parties. There's like
Yeah.
figure out where you fit in that process. And again, it's not that it can't evolve, but it gives you a much more relatable starting point.
Yeah. I love that. And for the markets that are so competitive, how does a brand really, I mean, I know we've talked a lot about different experiences and it might be different depending on your product or your industry or your service or whatever.
Yep.
But how can a brand really um, set themselves apart? And like what strategies can they put in place to ensure that they're really relating or speaking to a certain type of person?
I think it's getting inside the brand again. B- the guy who I work with primarily, like on paid ads, he talks about it all the time. That
Mm.
paid ads, billboards, like there's all these different kind of marketing tactics and things that are out there that a person can do, and a lot of them work great for certain kinds of people, certain industries and whatnot. But really what all of these different kind of tools are is they are tools to enhance what lives behind that, which is the brand. So
Mm.
they enhance what you already have. So if you
Yeah.
don't have a very well flushed out brand and it's pretty non-specific, and if you yourself don't even really know, like we really don't have it that dialed in, it's
Yeah.
that much harder to be successful at ads, and it's that much harder to put a message out there that's consistent and relatable. It's that much harder for the consumer to really know what you're all about. So
Yeah.
you know, you're kind of digging yourself out of a hole by doing a lot of these things without having a very well calibrated brand. So the
Yeah.
more calibrated your brand, the more confidence, the more clarity, the more it just enhances the whole process, which again kind of stretches the dollar. It actually saves you money in the long run. It's
Yeah.
so worth it to kind of explore your brand and really dial that in at the beginning. And I don't know if that's answering your question, but like it's to me, it's really more about that than anything else. And then pick your poison. Then it's whether it's paid ads or print collateral or mailing or whatever it is you want to do to get that message out there. It's it's going to work a lot better when you know exactly who you are and you have a reference point to come back to if you need to adjust, if you need to
Yeah.
evolve.
So how do we determine, like, I guess, what are those like key components of like a well calibrated brand? So we have our logo, we have that reference point of that ideal target. You've talked a lot about identity or like who
Mhm.
we are, like what is that? Is that our vision as a company? Is that what we stand for? Like what could those things be potentially made up of to make us a well calibrated brand?
I think it's all of the above as you can articulate it. So, like, at the beginning,
Mm.
sometimes we don't know what we don't know. So
Yeah.
I would start with, well, first of all, we got to flush out the discovery phase of this, of who you are, where you want to go in this process, who do you relate to, what target are you going after, really flushing out at its core kind of the foundational elements of how we'll build this brand. Then
Mhm.
things shift a little bit into the tactical side of, let's get a logo process going. And then once that's done, let's build out a brand style guide. Let's build out a Milanote that kind of shows the different brand examples and kind of design styles and blah 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 blah. And the
Yeah.
point of that is you're slowly kind of calibrating and developing foundation, and the clarity with each one of these tactical exercises, the clarity starts to really develop, so that by the time you go from discovery to logo to brand style guide to Milanote to social strategy, like the clarity
Mm.
just keeps layering and layering and layering, so that when you get to that, to a point in that process where, hey, maybe I've checked all the boxes. I've got all my social accounts set up, which I think is important to do at the beginning. I think,
Yeah.
website obviously it's something I think you have to have from a credibility standpoint. So I would definitely check
Yes.
that box. When you get all those pieces in place, so going from, like I said, discovery to logo to brand style guide to social platforms to website, you should have this sense of confidence that
Yeah.
now you can change the discussion again and say, okay, I've got my tools down, I got my foundations in place. How do I now
Mhm.
then talk to my people? How do I meet them where they're at? How do I find a way to become engaging, but still, not like cheesy salesperson? How do I
Yes.
find myself into their world and introduce them to who I am as a brand? And then that's when the voice and the kind of those culture pieces start to come into place. So whether it's
Yeah.
defining your core values or kind of doing a culture discovery culture doc for your company, then all of that then trickles into the way you sound, the way you present
Mhm.
yourself, all these things. And I know this is a very cliche word in the industry right now, but it's basically authenticity. The easiest path for this is going to be starting with kind of who you and your team members are. And let's
Yeah.
build from there. So that way, if we know if we get a little off track, we can always come back to who we are. But that authenticity is huge. And I know people take that, and it's a buzzword. They throw it out there as, yeah, we're so
Totally.
authentic, but it's great, good
Yeah.
for you, good for everybody else. But truly being authentic means that you're crafting this brand, this voice, this culture from that kind of internal place. And it
Yeah.
will, like, don't try to be something you're not, is basically the moral of the story, because
Yeah.
it's hard to adjust from that. It's hard to
Mhm.
find your way through that if you're just kind of telling people what they want to hear anyway. Where if you build it as a true authentic source of or extension of yourself, you can always come back to them and make an adjustment, and you'll find that you're so much more relatable. Like
Yes.
creating the content, hopping on TikTok, doing Facebook lives, whatever it is, you'll be able to dovetail into a lot of these different processes organically and naturally, versus trying to create a script or an identity around something that's kind of made up. Does that make sense?
Yeah. Yes. And I feel like that really touches on the storytelling side
Yeah.
of communicating your brand. And how does storytelling really come into play? And how can brands effectively implement that storytelling into their marketing strategy or when they're choosing tactics? Like what can that look like?
Um, for me, the storytelling again is just an extension of the authenticity in the brand, and it's
Yeah.
you don't have to you don't have to uh, share every greasy detail, but
Mhm.
sharing the pieces that are relatable and kind of help clients um, kind of meet you where you're at and to a degree is super
Mhm.
helpful. So like even in my own branding and marketing of Cyberdogz, I talk about the entrepreneurial journey. I talk
Yeah.
about where we're at in our growth process. I talk about, even our own branding because, as a branding company, we struggle with branding because we're working on everybody else's stuff all the time. And
Yes. Oh my gosh, that is like the most true thing
right.
ever. Like
And it's
sometimes we're sitting in a team meeting and we're like, guys, we're like crushing it doing this for this client. We could totally implement that for ourselves.
yeah, and it seems kind of common sense, but because I am in the same place as everybody else from a business owner perspective and whatnot, I share those struggles and those realities with people to make myself more approachable and have conversations with my clients about their process. So
Yeah.
to your question, I think being a good storyteller is really about, you know, talking about it's not fiction, right? So we're talking
Yeah.
about
The
things we
real
know.
stuff.
It's real
Yeah.
stuff. So we're talking about things we know, things we experience and are experiencing as business owners and even whatever industry you're in. So I think
Yeah.
it's I think sometimes we overcomplicate it by trying to be like our competitors or trying to tell a story that's like I want people to know I've been in the industry for this long and I know all this information and like I want them to perceive me as a thought leader. And it's like, yeah,
Yeah.
you and everybody else, dude. Like that's what everybody says that. And I'm not saying you're
Yep.
not those things, but
Yeah.
I feel like that's naturally and organically already expected of you.
Yeah.
Tell them about the stuff they don't know. Tell them about,
Yeah.
yeah, I've been in the industry for 30 years, but let me tell you what I've really learned in 30 years. It boils down to three big things. Share those things, and then people are going to go, oh man, this guy's got, a depth or a perception of the industry that I haven't heard before. That is
Yeah.
what's going to get you in the door, not your resume.
Yeah. Gosh, that alone, like that nugget, I'm like, yep, we're done. That was
Yeah.
it. That was the golden ticket. I love that. Yes, authenticity definitely such a buzzword. I think in marketing, but just in all
Yeah.
branding. Like every brand wants to be showing up as their most authentic self, right? And they want to be approachable and relatable. But like you said earlier, you can't be something that you're not, right? So like you either are these things and these core values and um have people on your team that represent you in that way as well. Like that's really key too. Uh, or you don't have that. And I think authenticity is very refreshing these days when you can find the true authenticity and authentic brands and storytellers. So yeah, gosh, that last bit. That was also good. Everything's been great, but that was so good. I love that.
Just just to
Um,
add just to add something on that, like we have clients that, when we're meeting with them and onboarding them, they will say, customer service is paramount in our business and blah, 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 blah. And I'll say, tell me more about that. Well, we've got
mhm.
some of the best customer service in the industry. And okay, but do you? Tell me more about that.
Yeah,
Do you just
yeah,
have we have a customer service team and we have handbooks and we have HR and we have the stuff. Like we go through the motions, but are you really the best at like figure that out?
yes,
And if you're not, make the adjustment. But if you also figure out that maybe we need to dial that back, not that we won't work on it and that we won't aspire to be, but if we're
yeah,
truly not, brag worthy of that aspect of our business, let's tell that story differently so it 100% connects with the people because
yeah.
they know that they notice that. So,
Yes. And that I think that's so true too for us, like when we're working with someone and they say something along those lines too. Like my biggest thing with marketing and branding overall is just you perceive yourself one way, right?
yeah.
Like they think they are the best. But what is everyone else really saying about your brand or about your company or about their experience with you? And I love to go and look at reviews. I
Mhm.
like almost every client we work with, I'm looking at your great reviews and why people say you're so amazing. But I'm also looking at the bad reviews, because those have a lot, like, yes, you are going to have just an angry client, like a very situational circumstance, right? Where it was just like, there was no appeasing them. But sometimes you can see a trend with those. And
Mhm.
maybe that's telling a different narrative, that maybe you aren't great at delivering packages on time or shipping things on time or getting something to someone exactly when they need it. Or maybe you're not great at customer service overall when someone comes that calls and has a problem and wants it to be addressed or fixed.
Yep.
Like, everything about your brand is, it's hard because you can control what you can control, right? But we also have to be very in tune with the customers and their perception of us, because that is the true, like, perception becomes reality when it comes to branding, right? Like what they perceive is the truth. Like, we can
Yep.
be saying one thing all day long, but if they feel something else about us and our brand, that's the true reality in that moment.
Yep.
And I think that's a really hard pill for businesses to swallow, but I really feel like, especially entrepreneurs, like, who are still in that like 5-10 year time of just getting their business started, and even earlier than that, because it's so personal, right? Like, it's so hard to not take that so personal when you have this idea of who you are and your brand and who you're trying to become, and yet people are having this completely different experience. So
And I think to that point, I think why it's such a hard pill to swallow is because there's a disconnect as to who they are versus the perception. And
yeah,
it's like, well, that's your answer right there, is that you need to dial in the perception to actually be who you are.
yeah,
That's kind of the missing piece, or that's the part you maybe skipped at the beginning of the process. And even as we talked earlier, you could just be, you might just have the wrong customer there.
yeah,
Maybe when you're finding your right people, maybe, yeah, you're 5-star reviews all day long, but maybe somewhere in that process, you started bringing in the wrong people, and
mhm,
those are your 1-star, 2-star people because it wasn't a good fit to begin with. So
yeah,
really, to kind of put a cap on it, like, it's that intention, the personal awareness of where you are in this process and this brand journey. It's huge because you can then also start to kind of dissect that feedback differently.
yeah, yeah. Oh gosh, so good. Oh my God, 37 minutes. We're y'all.
Sorry.
No, no, this was all amazing. It was so good. Mike, truly, thank you so much for having me on Brand Retro. Y'all, if you want a great podcast to go and listen to and tune into, go check out Mike's podcast, Brand Retro. You can find it on Spotify, like Apple Podcasts, all the streaming, wherever you find a podcast, you can find Brand Retro. Go and tune in there. You can even tune in and listen to my episode. I think it was like published a few episodes ago, if you want to scroll back and tune into that one as a starting point. But Mike, again, thank you so much for your time. This was a phenomenal episode. And thank you all for tuning in, whether you're watching live or I know so many of y'all catch the replay. You're catching the replay right now. Tell us your best takeaway or something that you learned new about branding, or something that you're going to go and implement or go and study now as a result of tuning in today. You can drop that in the comments on LinkedIn, YouTube, or Facebook. And thank y'all all for being here. Next week, we have an internal Ugly Mug guru who is not new to Coffee Chats, but we are going to be having Megan, our digital marketing specialist. Megan is going to be talking to us about TikTok, because her and Lily, our marketing coordinator, have been working hand in hand on the Ugly Mug Marketing TikTok. They've learned a lot, have a lot of great takeaways and tactics that you can go and turn around and implement, or even you can learn from our mistakes that we've made as we've been learning and growing and scaling the Ugly Mug Marketing TikTok. So tune in next week, Wednesday at 10 a.m. Central, 11 a.m. Eastern. Awesome. Oh, I see Colleen said this was great. Thanks so much. I'll definitely be checking out the podcast. Thanks, Colleen.
Yeah,
Thank you so much
thank
for
you.
tuning in today. And again, we will catch y'all next week. See you next time.